Hi, everybody. This is Saad for the Saad Truth. Today I have a Canadian Israeli documentarian, Igal Hecht. How are you doing?
I'm great, God. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to meet you.
No problem. Likewise, it's a pleasure to meet you. And I hadn't planned on this, but I think maybe three or four last guests have all been dealing with a region that I had left long ago, but apparently it never leaves you. I had Douglas Murray on earlier in the week, and then yesterday I had John Spencer on, who's a urban warfare. He's a colonel and we spoke about, is the Israeli army the most moral army in the world? He had some interesting insights about that. And then today I have you to discuss. I almost feel guilty having any sort of happy face on discussing what is arguably a breathtakingly somber topic. The Killing Roads is a documentary. Why don't you start us off there? How did you get involved in it? How did you do it? What was the process?
Right. So The Killing Road is a documentary that explores what happened on routes 232 and route 34 on October 7th. These are the two main arteries of the Gaza envelope. And on those roads, 250 Israelis were savagely murdered by Palestinian terrorists on October 7th. The way I started making the film is initially when the 7th happened, I knew I was going to make a film about the 7th. And I reached out to my longtime partner in Israel, Lior Cohen, and we started filming a different film with Israeli director Dotan Naveh. And that film is going to come out in October, and it deals with women who survived the massacre of Kibbutz Kfar Aza. But while, exploring the 7th and watching all the footage, I started looking at a lot of footage that Hamas filmed on the roads and the way they savagely murdered so many Israelis. And then an article came out in Haaretz and in the New York Times that dealt with the killing roads. It basically dealt with the roads themselves and what happened on those roads. And not a lot of people outside of Israel, but even within Israel, understood the level of barbarity and savagery that occurred on that day on those roads. And so that got me thinking that I really want to focus on the roads themselves. And I contacted Lior and I said, look, I really want to make this movie. We couldn't find any financing. Nobody wanted to back this movie, not on the Canadian broadcaster or anywhere else. And so it was like, shut up or put up. And I put up my own, money and basically traveled to Israel. And thanks to Lior, who's always brilliant, and our fixer in Israel, Einat, we basically had a very small, tight crew, and we filmed for about a month. We interviewed 23 people. The entire film takes place on the roads themselves. And it really illustrates, almost minute by minute what occurred on those roads. So while some people know this story and that story, we really paint a broader picture of how Hamas takes over the main arteries, the main junction points, set up ambushes. They're dressed in IDF uniforms, and they're just waiting for people to come to kill in the most brutal and savage way. And so that basically sums it up. That's how I began the process of making the film.
How, I mean, to be honest with you, I thought, okay, well, let me see if I can watch the documentary in preparation of our chat. And I actually didn't because I, for obvious reasons. How do you, emotionally, how did you deal with being there, narrating the stories, being witness to the stories and so on? Has it left an irrevocable, I mean, it must have left an irrevocable mark on you.
It definitely has. It's one of the hardest films I've ever made. I've made over 70 films in my career. A lot of them deal with genocide. I've dealt with the Rwandan, the Cambodian, the Yazidi genocide, and that was, sheer barbaric savagery at the hands of ISIS, and what's happening in Sudan with the Janjaweeds. This was very personal. I had family that was impacted. I had friends who were murdered. And so it was very, very emotionally hard to make. And in the film, there are two moments. I'm usually very detached from what I film. You keep that barrier. But there were two moments where I just couldn't hold it, basically. I don't like putting myself in my films, but here I felt that I had to. Um, I think the when you make a film like this, you're really focused on the mission itself, and the mission is to show what happened on that day. to counter the denial, to counter the lies that people have put out there about the seventh, the anti-Semites or the woke progressive left who, for whatever reason, has aligned himself with psychotic Islamist radicals. Um, but this was different, and so the actual filming wasn't as hard as the post-production process afterwards. I edited the film as well, and we got our hands on 50 hours of raw, never before seen footage of what happened on the roads, right after, the IDF maybe took over a junction point and killed the terrorists. You see the carnage that was left, you see the dead bodies, you see everything that was done. And so that was probably the hardest, going through 50 hours of footage of raw material and looking for the bodies, the cars of the people who we interviewed, the family, the loved ones who were lost, looking for that footage, and we found most of it. So we could not just not just illustrate what happened through a talking head, through an interview, but really visually hone in and showcase the sheer barbarity and the savagery that Hamas and other Palestinian terrorists unleashed on that day, and also everyday citizens from Gaza. What people might not be aware of is that 7,000 terrorists reached into Israel on that day in a matter of 3 to 4 hours from 129 vantage points. Or initially, they thought it was only 3,000, but 7,000 armed terrorists reached and started just savagely murdering people. There was one aspect that we couldn't talk about, and that's the decapitation and the severing of limbs. A lot of the Hamas terrorists had machetes with them, and we interviewed one Magen David officer, who the equivalent of an ambulance emergency task force in Israel, who, she showed us photos. She told us she got at least 6 bodies that she had to identify what occurred to them that were brought to her on the field as everything was happening. That was something I just couldn't handle putting in the movie. But everything else is there. You really see them going car by car. It wasn't enough to kill. They had to, make sure that they burn the bodies on the roads, drag the body out of the car, burn it on the roads. And how do we know this? Because they released that footage. At least 50% of it, the footage in the film is footage from Hamas, is footage from the terrorists themselves.
How do you deal with the fact that, I mean, I deal with this every day as I try to engage people and change their opinions on things. Here you have the actual raw footage. So, from the perspective of an evidentiary threshold that you're trying to reach to try to convince someone, it'd be difficult to find more compelling evidence than the evidence of the actual brutality taking place. But guess what? Apparently, it doesn't really convince anybody because the Hamas guys are really Israeli guys pretending to be Hamas because it's really the Jews who killed other Jews in order to be able to then justify the genocide that they're going to commit in Gaza and on and on and on. I actually talk about this in my forthcoming book. I have a book titled Suicidal Empathy, where I talk about, the same people who are perfectly happy being suicidally empathetic to every single wrong target cannot usher a minuscule millimeter amount of empathy towards those Jews. So how do you so you start this off with the noble goal of I want to document what happened, but then there's a whole swath of people, and as you said, some are leftists, some are Islam folks, there's a whole
Yeah,
cocktail of folks who say, yeah, that just proves that it's the Jews who did it because there's nothing that you're going to show me, Igal, that's going to prove to me that this really happened. How do you deal
right.
with that?
It's very hard because it's, piss poor intellectualism, right? I mean, you have self-anointed individuals who are now spokespeople about the Middle East. I'm not going to mention any names, but individuals who, I don't know, read a Wikipedia page or failed in their own careers.
I just interacted with one of
I
those
saw
folks.
their interaction. I saw their interaction. And, I'm all for people having their say, etc. But when people pretend that they're experts, forget having not never been there, just basically regurgitating something they read, and they're an expert because they have a platform, doesn't make you an expert. Kind of makes you more of a dumbass, in my opinion. But moving from that, how do you convince these people? It's very hard. I have colleagues, right? I have colleagues in this field who I've made films with, who I've interacted with over the years. And they, from the get-go, first it started with, it never happened.
Yeah.
It was a small attack, and Israel is using this to justify attacking Gaza. And by the way, we're talking 4 days in. We're not even talking, a year later. We're talking 4 days in. And then a month later, it was like the rapes never happened. There's no evidence of rape. And these
Because
are
Islam doesn't permit violence and rape, right?
right, never. I mean, the Yazidi women weren't raped,
That's
right?
true. Well, they
Seven.
could have been raped, but ISIS are not real Muslims.
Ah, of course, of course. So the 3,000 Yazidi women that are still missing, that's not really Islam. That's not really ISIS. That's not those radicals. No, no, no. Probably the Jews as well in these people's minds. But it's very hard to convince these individuals. These individuals, look, right now in Sudan, there's a genocide. The Janjaweeds are back killing South Sudanese people, Christians among them, raping them, killing them. Where are all the comedians that have a platform to talk about that? They're nowhere in sight because they don't care because it doesn't monetize itself, right? So it doesn't monetize itself, so it doesn't really matter. The same applies for Syria, what the new Al Qaeda regime that our government is sending $84 million to did in Syria 3 weeks ago. Killed over what, 2,000 Alawites? Where was the outrage? There isn't an outrage because, again, you can't monetize Arab Muslim radicals killing other Arab Muslim radicals. It doesn't really monetize itself. They don't really care. This their sole fascination is with the Jews. So it doesn't matter if we show them the truth. So they're not really my audience. I can't convince people who automatically have this anti-Semitic need to deny facts and truth, even when it's presented to them visually, not just a talking head. I can't really convince them. What I hope is that people who are genuinely interested in what occurred and are asking them, well, why did Israel go into Gaza? Why is Israel attacking Gaza? Watch this movie. See the savage barbarity in which the terrorists and ordinary Gazans conducting themselves on that day and unleashed on Israelis, and then they get some sort of an insight as to, well, I can't have anybody live beside individuals who constantly, on a daily basis, even now, 19 months after the 7th, say that they will commit October 7th over again. And that's something that's completely missing from, the conversation. Hamas to this day, A, refuses to put down their arms, would much rather sacrifice their own people, which they have constantly over this war, but also refuse to say that they'll never attack Israel again, right? Their whole thing is a hudna, ceasefire.
Yep.
Well, there was a ceasefire on October 6th. Who broke the ceasefire? Who sent 7,000 savages to murder and rape and burn Jews? Hamas did. So you're asking Israel to enter into a ceasefire with these terrorists who broke the initial ceasefire, who are promising to break the next ceasefire.
How do you explain the fact that many of the peaceniks who, I mean, of course, I've got my own explanation, but I'd love to hear yours. The peaceniks, the Jewish peaceniks who, John Lennon imagined stuff. Let's all get along.
Yep.
Everybody is lovely. Uh, have they autocorrected and are willing to now accept that maybe it's difficult to live side by side people who are, by self-definition, wishing to eradicate you, inshallah, when we have a chance, or no, they still hang on to the hope that it's just a few misunderstood maniacs who did this, but otherwise, my friend Ahmad is a really sweet guy, and I know that Islam is peaceful.
Hmm. I think it depends on where we look. If we look in Israel, the left is dead. The left
All
is
right.
pretty. If the left makes a lot of noise, the left makes a lot of noise in North America as well. So within Israel, organizations like Peace Now stayed very, very quiet for about a year. Now, again, they're sort of starting to creep up. Their former, I just saw an interview with their former, the lead of their organization, Yariv Oppenheimer, who's starting to talk about the two-state solution again, and this is the only solution, blah, 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 even though we saw what leaving territories such as Gaza does. They might wait 10 years, but they'll attack you regardless. Within Israel, I think there is an awakening. There's an awakening that the Oslo Agreement and the old propaganda that was sold to Israelis for 30 years was a complete and utter failure, right? The Gaza disengagement, which I covered, I was there for 2 months. I filmed with, again, with my partner, Lior Cohen. Um, we called the film Disengaging Democracy because when I came as a lefty to make that movie, I realized what was happening. Israelis were being lied to constantly, that there won't be any rockets, that there won't be any breach, et cetera, et cetera. And we saw it took 10, 20 years, but here we are. We are where we are right now. I think Israelis are waking up to that. I think it's very hard for the individuals who control the the positions of power within the Israeli society, be it the media, be it the courts, etc., to comprehend that because they still believe that you can make peace with the Arab states. And I believe you can make peace with the Arab states that are functioning states that are not terrorist entities. You know, you have peace with Jordan, you have peace with Egypt. Sure, it's all make believe and given the chance that attack, but it's still peace, whatever it is right now. And you can make peace as the Abraham Accords approved with Saudi Arabia and other states. You can't make peace with whether it's Hamas or the different shade of gray, the PA, that basically incite constantly on a daily basis against you, their education system, their television, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is all built on incitement. Having done a film about Palestinian education
Yes.
many years ago, even then in 2005, UNRWA books and other books were filled with incitement. Imagine now the same UNRWA that our current government is sending $100 million to. So, they can funnel it to Hamas and allegedly they can funnel it to Hamas and basically, use those funds to terrorize Jews and terrorize Israelis and terrorize their own people. All of this, you can't, it's very hard to make peace with an entity whose entire mandate is to destroy and kill you,
Yeah.
right? It's written in their charter. So Israelis are waking up to it. I think the seventh woke up something different here in North America. In Canada, more so, I would say, than in the US. More Canadians are conservatives. You can tell, the Globe and Mail and the CBC back to back ran two pieces on why are Canadian Jews so voting for conservatives? Well, because for 19 months the liberals unleashed the most catastrophic anti-Semitic time in our lives, right? Since the 1930s. I wonder why. When you call Khyber al Yahud in the streets of Montreal and you smash windows and and you shoot at Jewish schools and you firebomb Jewish schools and you call from the river to the sea or in Toronto 4 days after the after the seventh, they were screaming around Dundas Square and in Mississauga that in Arabic that you should bash the Zionists' heads in. I wonder why most Jews in Canada are going to be voting conservatives. I think Jews are waking up to the reality that all of this nonsense that we were sold works with maybe the people who were here before, who understood how Canada works, right? The Canadian government ushered in people from extremely radicalized countries, right? The Liberal government ushered them in without vetting them, without actually looking at the security concerns of what is going to happen in this country. And they unleashed radical forces where this country is going to become, and you say it all the time, and obviously I follow you, and you're extremely 100% correct. This country is going to become like Europe, like the UK, like France. It's almost copy and paste what happened under Corbyn. The same thing is happening in the Liberal Party right now. So yeah, they haven't taken over yet. These extremist, leftist, anti-Semitic elements, they haven't. But how many people signed the pledge to Palestine? 20 liberal MPs, right? So next election is going to be 50 to 100. And eventually, you're going to have a Liberal Party, which is very similar to the Labour Party in the UK. And eventually, you're going to have the same marches and the same hatred and the same public broadcaster that rationalizes and excuses it, like you have in the UK, like you have in Holland, like you have in France. And we're all going to have to live with that. So the seventh unleashed all of this on Canadian Jewry, on North American Jewry, and even those people who were like, I'm not that affiliated, whatever. We kumbaya and the John Lennon types, can we all just get along? are realizing, oh wow, they really don't want to get along with me. They really hate me.
I mean, I don't know how optimistic you are. I mean, thank you for saying that you follow my work. While I always try to put on as optimistic an outlook as I can, not to sell people a wrong packet of goods, but you need to be optimistic. Otherwise, there's no point getting out of bed. I fear that it's irrevocable now. It truly is because it's just a demographic game. And the reason why for several decades now I've been standing on top well before October 7th by decades, right? I mean, look, I'll tell you a quick story that I'm not sure if I've ever shared this publicly, but here it goes. Uh, Whenever I would see the increase of veiled women in Montreal, it would so trigger me because I would understand what was coming downstream. My daughter, who at the time was very, very young, probably 5, 6, 7 years old, whenever she would see the veiled women, she would try to divert my attention, knowing that if I saw them, it would probably send me off into some tirade that I'm going to get into. Now, of course, now someone's going to write, well, you're such an Islamophobe. It's just a sartorial thing. What's the big deal? Well, the reality is, it doesn't take a fancy professor and evolutionary behavioral scientist to connect the dots for you. The
Right.
problem is that people don't have the courage of forecasting and extrapolating downstream because that's scary. So it's much better for me to sing the John Lennon Imagine song because I could go about my business today, get the tomatoes for tonight's dinner, get ready for my daughter's graduation party, because otherwise it's very difficult to deal with reality. But that reality is going to bite you eventually in the behind, whether you wish to face it or not. Now people are waking up, but I really can't see how you can reverse the trends in that. Yes, it might be the case that Islam is not yet the majority, religion in Canada. But inshallah, it's only a matter of time. As the Taliban used to tell the American soldiers, you may have all the watches, but we have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
And this is exactly how Islam plays, right? I mean, and I have said this a million times, but I'll say it again to you here, Igal, for those of you who may have never heard me say that. The Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamists have said, we're going to conquer the West in three means. We're going to conquer them through the womb of our women. We're going to conquer them through hijrah, which is immigration, which is exactly what they're doing. And number three, which is arguably the most insidious one, is we are going to conquer the West by using your miserable freedoms against you. Oh, poor Mahmoud Khalil. He's just a graduate student who's trying to just exercise his freedom of speech. Why are you mean to him and you want to deport him? So, do you see, Igal, any hope of the West actually waking up and creating a cataclysmic autocorrection, or are we doomed?
Very hard question. Because like you, I'd like to say that I have a hope that it's possible to combat this radicalization of North America. But the patterns and what you're seeing happening, if you look at Europe and if you look at what's happening today, we're always a generation behind. I recently wrote an article to get the Getstone Institute called talking about the crisis of Canadian Jewry. And we're always a generation behind. We're always a generation behind the UK. So if I look into what might happen, right? I don't have a crystal ball, but if I hypothesize as to what might happen in the future, I look at Europe. We have the exact same policies. We have the exact same, we give money.
Incentivize.
Thank you.
Incentivize.
You always get stuck in a word. Uh, in the same manner that Europe did. So they want to bring in 5,000 Palestinians from Gaza. Okay. So they're going to allocate 3,000 for adults, I believe, and 1,500 is a one-time payment for children. And so if you have X amount of children, you get this kind of money. The same happened in the UK through welfare, etc. And the thing is that you're right. When we start talking in this way, people always scream this phobe and that phobe and racism, etc., because nobody wants to deal with the actual reality, the financial reality of it all, but also the security reality of it all. We didn't have this in Canada, this radicalization, these protests 20 years ago, 10 years ago. I have covered a lot of protests in Toronto, in Ottawa, within the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Everybody understood the rules. You come, you protest in front of the consulate, you do your little song and dance, you scream whatever. Maybe now and again you do a march in downtown, but that's it. Never, ever were they allowed to scream, to kill Jews, to bash their heads in, to burn Jews, to smash to the encampments, etc. Look at the encampments. The whole thing with the encampments. That's a perfect example as to how Canada lost full control. Imagine, and Piers Morgan said it before, and others have said it as well. But again, imagine if I don't know, white nationalists decided to come to McGill or to U of T, set up camp and say, no black students or minorities allowed here. We're going to physically stop them. We're going to scare them. We're going to go into the library and demand to know who the black and minorities are, etc., etc. Would that be allowed? Would that be excused? Would our public broadcaster try to find the rationale as to why is this happening? No, of course it wouldn't, and it shouldn't. Whether it's for Jews or for Muslims or for blacks or for anybody else, it shouldn't. This is not Canada. But when it comes to Jews, there's context, right? When it comes to Jews, there's always context. There's always this underlying hatred where, this thing in Gaza, yeah, sure, it's tied into Canadian Jews. How? You don't know what this Jew on campus feels. You don't know what they're saying. You don't know if they're even engaged. But somehow attacking the entire Jewish community is allowed. And we see that this is continuously excused by the Canadian government, by the federal government, by the provincial government. I don't even want to talk about the municipality here in Toronto and that woman who basically cried on Ben Mulrooney's show that she had to stand for 2 hours in the rain while she condemned, the third attack on a Jewish school. We see it happening in all levels of government, and it's really frightening because if I take Europe as a test case, I think you're right. I don't know how we go back unless we have a government and serious people also within the Muslim community as well, because there are a lot of frightened people within the Muslim community. They escaped. They left these countries not to have all of this radicalization come back, come at them when they're in Canada. Having a serious discussion. What do we do against the radicalization, the Islamic radicalization of Canada? And I say Islamic radicalization because I don't see, right? There are cases and they're abhorrent and they should be condemned, any attacks against Muslims in Canada. But the majority of attacks currently happening in this country are against Jews, right? We're 2024 over 6,200 attacks. If you tie in the first 4 months of this year, we're probably close to 10,000. So the group that is getting attacked the most is the Jewish community. The group, and this is where people are going to go, that's racist. But again, one plus one. Most likely, allegedly, I'll start with that. The group that is doing the most of the attacking comes from the radicalized Muslim community. And of course, their woke friends who have decided to embrace this radical Islam, even though it truly contradicts everything that the progressive movement stands for. It contradicts women's rights, it contradicts gay rights, it contradicts, the list goes on and on, trans rights. Whenever I see trans for, I don't know, for Palestine, I'm like, are you? And having done a film within the West Bank and Palestinian controlled areas and in Israel about gay Palestinians living in both societies, I can tell you it contradicts those rights. They are escaping, gay Palestinians are escaping Ramallah and are escaping these cities and going to Tel Aviv and Haifa to find shelter. Why? Because if they stay there in Palestine, in this country, so-called country that they keep talking about, they would be murdered. And yet, for whatever reason, what is the reason for the progressive movement, the left-leaning movement, to join with Islamists that contradict everything they believe in? Well, anti-Semitism, because they, It's easier to hate the Jews.
Look, I know you said you used the word radicalized a few times, and maybe you truly believe it. Maybe it's just you trying to be diplomatic.
Diplomatic.
Okay, as I've explained on innumerable occasions, there is no such thing as radical Islam. There is no militant Islam. There is no extremist Islam. There is no qualifier behind Islam. All Islamic scholars and leaders will tell you that, including Erdogan, most recently, including Yusuf Qardawi, the now dead former Sunni head from Al Azhar University. So you couldn't get higher than that. He certainly seems to know what Islam is, and he certainly speaks Arabic. So we can't say, if only he understood Arabic or understood the Quran or the Hadith or whatever. So there is a reflex whereby, because we can all point to innumerable Muslims who are nice, the brain is tricked into thinking that they are practicing gentle, polite Islam, whereas the people who are doing the radical things are practicing radical Islam. There is no such thing. They just happen to be people who are nice, happen to be born into a Muslim heritage, and choose to ignore those parts. In the exact same way that when I eat shrimps, I don't eat shrimps because I practice gentle Judaism, whereas there is an extremist form of Judaism that actually has those kashrut laws. I just ignore the parts that I
Right.
don't wish to participate, to partake in. So Islam is Islam. It's codified and it's clear. Many people choose to ignore tons of it, and that's great. But to borrow an analogy from virology, shingles exists in you, and then it could be triggered depending on various possible triggering factors. Some of us will have an outbreak of shingles in our 50s and 60s. Some of us will avoid it. And the only thing that's different, the shingles virus was in you, but something had to light it. So now the analogy is the reason why you didn't have the encampments 10 years ago, the reason why the protests that you spoke of 10 years ago were different in their timber and in their poisonous nature is because the numbers were not yet there for the noble Muslim people to be more emboldened. So it's only a numbers game. When there's only three of us, we're peaceful. But why, God? Why? I am peaceful. Okay. But as we're 300, we're become a bit less tolerant. As we become 3 million, we're a bit more emboldened. And then
Right.
one day you close your eyes and open your eyes and you say, I better put on really good running shoes and run really fast because otherwise I'm dead. And it's called my childhood. Okay. And
Right.
it's called 1400 years of history. So, and I completely understand your desire to add the radical, but I'm not lecturing this at you. It's more for our viewers. There is no radical Islam. There is just Islam. Care to comment on that?
No, I look, I agree with you there, but as you said, am I being diplomatic or not? I usually try to be diplomatic, but I think like I said before, when it comes to how things work, and we have to be honest about things. Again, this is what happened in Europe. When I used to go and film in London 20 years ago, it was different. But as you say, they are emboldened, and now it's completely different and fully violent. Montreal is the biggest, and I think I'm quoting you or paraphrasing you, but you can tell me if I'm wrong, is the biggest hub of terrorism in North America. Or
Oh, that's
probably
me. I
that's
wrote
you, I
I wrote an
remember.
article. Yes.
I know, and I quoted it in one of the articles I wrote. And but it's also true because you see what happens in Montreal on a weekly basis. And the reason is because there is a larger Muslim community there. And so people feel emboldened to come out and to let their inner Jew hater out and you know scream Khyber Khyber. And because also the police refuses to charge anybody who screams to commit a genocide against Jews in Arabic, the large audience that's there, minus a few, kafia Karens, basically understand the message. And the message is go and kill the Jews. What other message is there when somebody scream Khyber Khyber al Yahud?
Just for
You
the people who don't know, this is a war cry that comes from the Jewish tribes in Khaybar when there was this cry too. And so often in those kinds of dynamics, there is that cry which really literally speaks to the eradication and extermination of Jews. It literally is a war cry of Jewish extermination. Khaybar, Khaybar, yeah, Yahud. And then I won't say the rest because it's in Arabic. But you're exactly right, right? Marie Leblanc from Joliette, Quebec, doesn't understand those dynamics because the Kafia Karen, who's wearing the thing as a cool accoutrement, Che Guevara revolution, doesn't get that subtlety. And so it's so galling, right? Because as you said, and you're right, there are a lot of Muslims who've also left those lands because they want to put it behind, not just Jews. And yet I'm sitting there and I'm saying, I almost feel more afraid in Montreal than I did pre-Civil War in Lebanon. How did we get here? It's unbelievable.
I have friends when I went and filmed the film, the Israelis were asking me about what the hell is happening in Canada. Is there terrorism there? Why is, and it's hard to explain. You see this every day, and what's infuriating is the fact that the local media plays along with it. Doesn't question the fact that they're smashing Jewish institutions, etc. Sure, there'll be that story where another Jewish and suspected anti-Semitism and some official, we must fight uh, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism
Yes.
is intertwined.
Yes.
And and you're just like, but why aren't you asking the questions as to why are Canadian Jews being targeted? What does being a Jew have to do with Israel? So does that mean in terms of this conflict, right? You don't know what that Jew stands for. You don't know anything about that person. So why are you attacking them? And so, and if we use that rationale, right? If we're okay with that rationale, if the Canadian media and the Canadian politicians and the progressives are saying it is okay to attack Jews because of Israel, does that mean the Jews can attack, I don't know, Muslims and Arab because of Hamas, because of
Well,
Syria,
actually,
of Hezbollah?
forgive me for interrupting you, but I've actually, on several occasions, put up the following logic. Uh,
Hmm.
if anything happens in Gaza at the hands of the IDF, all Jews anywhere in the world are to blame, including, say, a barely conscious 3 day old Jewish baby. On the other hand, when 47,000 plus Islamic terror attacks since 9/11 alone in roughly 70 countries are committed in the name of Islam, not a single Muslim is to blame, including the perpetrators of the 47. You see how beautiful that logic is? Jews are responsible for everything, even if they're not responsible for anything. Muslims are not responsible for anything, even if they are the ones who perpetrated it. It's beautiful.
Beautiful. It's yeah, very much so. And going back to October 7th, this is exactly what happened. And and one of the main reasons I made the film because after the seventh happened, the Jews of the world had a 5 to 7 days of sympathy. We had the Shiva sympathy.
Maybe not even that many days. You're being
Maybe not.
charitable.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm trying. And then after it's like they're attacking Gaza. Well, why? Oh, the Palestinians did something, but it's because of 76 years of occupation. What the hell are you talking about? And all of these narratives were constructed to basically legitimize the barbaric attacks, the savagery that Palestinian terrorists unleashed on the 7th. And again, going back to the film, when you see how they walked into bomb shelters, bus bomb shelters along the road, and they just threw grenades in and they spray everybody there, and then they carry dead bodies and they burn bodies on the roads, and they shot up at anyone who was moving on that road, and they raped women. And when you see all of that, and yet you ignore it as if it didn't happen. It's infuriating. It's beyond infuriating. Nobody in Israel, and this is something, this is really key, this is really important. Nobody in Israel woke up on the 7th wanting to be in Gaza, wanting to attack Gaza, wanting to have to do anything with Gaza. 7,000 savage, barbaric terrorists, people of Gaza, woke up with one mission: murder, kill Jews. That was it. Nothing else. Inflict as much damage as possible and murder and kill Jews. And so that is why Israel retaliates. That is why Israel went into Gaza. That is why Israel has to eradicate Hamas. Because if they don't do it, then this will happen again and again. And if you want examples, you're right. There's 47,000 examples in the last 20 years, as recently as Kashmir,
Yeah.
right?
2 days ago. Yeah.
In Nigeria, nobody's talking about what's happening in Nigeria, the fact that Christians are murdered there constantly. And so it's infuriating to have people go, well, there's a genocide. No, there isn't a genocide. There's a war, and war is horrible. But this is a war that Israel didn't want. This is a war that nobody in Israel wanted. And the other thing that's really always interesting, and I think Douglas Murray spoke about it, and so many other people, yourself as well. They talk about the numbers of dead in Gaza. Just as recently as 2 weeks ago, it was reported in various media that Hamas dropped 3,500 people from their dead list, and that the majority, 72%, the majority who have died are males ranging in age from 18 plus, combat age, basically. And people are like, well, no, innocent civilians are dying, etc., etc. Okay. I based everything on facts, and I based my facts not on Israel, not on the IDF, not even on Douglas Murray, even though he's the most brilliant man, in my opinion. He's absolutely brilliant.
You
I,
meant, okay.
yeah, but when he speaks about, when he speaks about this, I base it on Hamas. I base it on Islamic Jihad. I base it on going on their Telegram channels, which I am a member of for many years, and I download their footage. And in their footage, you see how they embed themselves within the Gazan society. They're dressed in plain clothes. They fire from outside hospitals. They fire from Gazans' homes, from Gazans' schools, etc., etc. So when there's retaliation and they are shot at and they are killed, it's an innocent civilian.
Yeah.
Everything, if and that's the real sheer genius of Hamas.
Yeah.
They don't hide what they do, right? They hid nothing. They filmed it all. They documented it all. They published it all. They live streamed it. And yet, no, no, innocent. And yes, people die in a war, and it's horrible. And no one wants people to die. I don't want people to die in Gaza. I want people who belong to Hamas to meet their 72 virgin ending. But I don't want anyone to die in Gaza, let alone children, let alone women. But how else is Israel supposed to react? There was that comedian, the Egyptian comedian, what's his name?
Bassem Youssef.
Right. So he went on Channel 4 and he was asked, how is Israel supposed to retaliate? And his only answer was, not like this. Okay, but how? Not like this. But how? Not like this. That's not an answer. Hamas embedded itself within civilian population. Hamas is responsible for the death of Palestinian civilians. It doesn't care about Palestinian civilians. It certainly doesn't care about Jewish or Israeli civilians. It doesn't care about Arab Israeli civilians because it murdered them as well. It doesn't care about Nepalese civilians because it murdered them as well on the 7th. You know, it only cares about one thing: destruction and death, because they don't believe that life warrants anything. Death is true paradise.
Right.
So they have their goal and their mission. And their mission is to destroy the state of Israel. And they will do anything to accomplish that mission, including sacrificing their own people. Hamas could lay down their arms today, and leave Gaza. Be told, leave Gaza, find a safe house, I don't know, safe place in Qatar or in Turkey or wherever. And that's it. War's over. And obviously release all the 59 hostages that are still in captivity. And the war's over. It's done. But they won't. because they don't care about their own people.
Yeah, I think I mean again, yes, you're right when you mention Hamas, but it in a sense it does a disservice, and I'm not critiquing you here,
No, no,
but
no, you're right. I know
but
what you, yeah,
yeah, Hezbollah and Hamas and ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood and
same
this
thing.
75,000 other Islamic groups, we can point to them. What is common to them is the ideology that animates them, right? And that problem, we can get rid of every single person who's ever had a Hamas membership card, and the problem doesn't even remotely come to being solved. The problem is solved when the your definition as a member of a group is rooted in your DNA as requiring the eradication of another people. That really, that concept must be internalized. Hamas is only implementing this ideology, right? So I mentioned this actually yesterday in my show with John Spencer, but it's worth mentioning it here again. When I lecture about the ethics of targeting children in advertisements, when I teach a consumer psychology course, I explain that one of the frameworks that one uses in deciding when is it ethical to target children, and the answer is when the child has reached a cognitive developmental stage that allows him to understand the persuasive intent of the advertiser, because then they could erect defenses against that persuasion, right? I know you're trying to sell me something, and I could either listen to it or not, or counter argue against it. Below a certain age, a child doesn't know this, in which case his mind is too malleable and too impressionable. And then the argument is it's not moral to target that child. Now, why am I saying all this? If a child comes out of the womb and from that day, you're told the definition of part of who you are, and now let's fill in all of the Jew hatred, which
Yeah.
you documented in your film discussing the Palestinian education system, but it's also called My Childhood in Progressive Tolerant Lebanon. Then you realize that that's the problem. Once you literally have a complete shift and a rejection in these contents. So, take, for example, the idea that we had in the Salem witch hunts, which was a couple of hundred years ago. It was perfectly reasonable when we thought that our neighbor Linda could be a witch. Well, let's grab her, throw her into the water. If she swims, then that proves that she's a witch and we're going to burn her. And if she doesn't swim and sinks, oops, I guess we were wrong about Linda. She's not a witch. And we organized our neighborhood dynamics around that idea. But then one day we eradicated that idea so that today we can't find any instantiations of Salem witch hunts in the civilized world. That's what needs to happen with Islam. But regrettably, I can't see it happening because it is the final, inerrant, eternal word of God. Therefore, it makes it less susceptible to reformations and interpretations. Am I being too pessimistic?
No, I don't think you are. I think deep down, a lot of people agree with you because we haven't been shown by even the most moderate Muslim countries that they are willing to change that, right? Unfortunately, this is the world we currently live in, and Western democracies and Western societies are going to have to make a decision. Do we allow radicals, etc., to take over?
You're
Our,
smiling because you use the R word.
well, because look, as a filmmaker in Canada, we know when and how to be diplomatic.
I see. Try
And
to be an
so
academic
it's
and
it's bad enough the national broadcaster wants nothing to do with me now, let alone after
all right.
this. But, which is fine. I mean, we just have to really make a decision. We have to have a serious grown-up conversation. We really do. We just have to have a conversation about here are the facts, here's what's happening. How do we deal with this? Because if we're not going to deal with it here, going back to what was said earlier, if we're not going to be dealing with this here, if we're just going to constantly write op-eds about it and ignore stories of honor killings and ignore stories of grooming gangs like they did in the UK for 25 years and ignore all of this, we're just going to be in the exact spot. And it sounds very pessimistic, but I'm being very, brutally honest and truthful as somebody who has followed this for 20 to 25 years now through films and other things, we're just going to be basically in the same state as Europe. And then that's going to bring to the rise of nationalism, and that's going to bring to other things as well, because eventually people are just going to say, what the hell is going on here? And they're going to wake up too late because we are being told, and also the scary part is legislation is coming down the pipeline that is telling us, well, you can't say this. And if you say this, and if you think it, and if I find it offensive, and if somebody finds it offensive, you might end up in jail. And now we're already seeing that in the UK.
That's
And
right.
that's the kind of legislation that's coming down the pipeline through protect everybody's, let's protect speech against hatred, but at the same time, it could easily be weaponized against any kind of thought. And that's scary because we're not willing. That's the thing about Canadians, right? You come from another country, I come from another country, from other societies that are more blunt. Let's just be tachlis and honest about that. Um, Canadians don't necessarily want to deal with things head on. There's a lot of passive aggressiveness constantly, lots of passive aggressiveness, but they don't necessarily want to deal with things head on because that is scary. And I think a lot of Canadians, not to turn this into an election campaign, but come April 28th, should really have these questions on their mind.
I was going to actually ask you about this because it's happening this Monday.
Yeah.
Uh, do you think, and I understand, I mean, you could give me your politics or not.
Oh, no, no, no. I'm very open on social media about this. It's
Oh, okay. So then I'll ask you directly. Do you
Yeah.
think that if, I mean, I posted yesterday, I'm also very open that it would be much better for Poilievre to win than Carney. But do you feel that Poilievre, notwithstanding that we probably both agree that he's a better choice, and so
Yeah.
I'm certainly behind him. Do you think that he has the cataclysmic ability to actually affect the types of changes that will serve as an appropriate autocorrection? Or is it just in the margins? Yes, objectively, he's better than Trudeau or Carney, but the problem is only going to be delayed.
So I think he does, but not necessarily through a minority government. I think he needs to win a majority government to be able to change anything. And I also don't think it's going to happen right away. I think people have to be realistic. I think we need at least two consecutive back-to-back conservative governments to change, just like the liberals changed everything within 10 years, right? This whole woke craziness and ideology that they brought into Canada happened over time. It didn't happen overnight. Small, small step, baby steps. And that's what we need Polyev to do. When it comes to being supportive of the Jewish community, he has been steadfast from the beginning. He has, and I think, and not to turn this into an election campaign, but on a personal note, I think that the liberal government continuously lies to the Jews, to the Jewish community. I think the liberal government has shown in the last 19 months what they actually think of the Jewish community, allowing this surge of anti-Semitism, unprecedented. The fact that they have their members supporting this, excuse my language, bullshit notion of genocide. The fact that you have a member going to mosques calling what Israel is doing a genocide, then going to the Oakville synagogue and saying, "Oh no, obviously I'm for two states, blah blah blah," and then standing in front of the prime minister and repeating his lies. That's problematic. And overall, I think the notion, and I think Jewish and Jewish members of, and by the way, we shouldn't just vote for because of Israel. Economically, I also think that
Of course.
conservatives have much better plan. Socially, I also think that conservatives have a much better realistic plan than the liberals do. But when it comes to the Jewish community, I think Jews really have to take a hard look in the mirror, stop hiding, stop, holding on to their progressive community that has shunned them, that has turned its back to them, that has basically told them that they're hated and not welcomed unless they toe the line and, utter anti-Semitic rhetoric. They have to really look hard at themselves and have to decide, are they willing to usher in a golden age of anti-Semitism into Canada? Because that's what's happening under the Liberal Party. Not to mention the fact that, as I said before, the Liberal Party is currently funneling $100 million into a slush fund called UNRWA, whose members have, even the UN agrees, took part in the raping, the murdering, and butchering of Jewish children, men, and women on October 7th. And I thought Hamas was an illegal organization that no Canadian can deal with. Technically, if you want to make an argument, the Canadian government is dealing with Hamas. They call it aid. Any thinking person, honest person, knows that anything that enters Gaza goes to Hamas, right? Any of the food. Why is there a food shortage in Gaza? That supposedly before Israel, closed the air um, checkpoint there, sorry, the border point, you'd had trucks going in every day. Every Gazan should have had 2 to 3,000 calories a day, uh, but they didn't. People in Sudan would die for for half of that, but they didn't. And why? Because Hamas siphoned and took all the food, killed anybody who tried to get the food, and created an industry, $1 billion industry for themselves. And nobody wants to talk about that. Any aid that goes into Gaza, anything, goes through Hamas.
And what's most galling is that the taxpayer, meaning you and
You and I. Yeah.
are funding this. So I literally have my book royalties stolen to fund my demise and that of my children. It is astounding.
And the most outrageous aspect of it is that they fully know that UNRWA is involved. They fully know what UNRWA is about. The Trudeau government was shown intelligence by officials. Carney knows that intelligence, and yet here we are. And to just go to another point, let's not forget that Justin Trudeau blood libeled Israel multiple times, from Al Shifa to Rafah, and never apologized for it, never corrected the record, right? The Al Shifa Hospital is a perfect example of a world leader going to X, blood libeling an entire country and community, claiming that Israel killed 500 people, never took place, right? The CIA, every intelligence, even the Europeans who don't have a lot of love for Israel at this moment said that. And there he was, not correcting the record, trying to weasel his way out of it.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
that was the Liberal Party in
yeah, I
the
mean,
last 15 months.
I explained in the parasitic mind that cultural relativism, right? Who are we to judge others is a very potent idea, pathogen, parasitic idea. And Justin Trudeau, before he became prime minister, when he was just an MP, if you remember early in his career, had gotten very upset when Stephen Harper's government had referred to honor killings, child brides, and female genital mutilation as barbaric. Justin Trudeau wasn't upset by the barbaric acts. He was upset that Stephen Harper's administration had called them barbaric acts. That was enough for me to stand up on top of the mountain and beg Canadians to not vote for this degenerate. And I did it for many, many years, and almost everybody ignored me. But now they write me emails and saying, "Ooh, Dr. Saad, we should have listened to you." I worry, and God willing, I should be proven to be wrong. I worry that this Monday we will be handing a fourth term to Justin Trudeau et al. But
Right.
inshallah, it doesn't happen.
Inshallah, you're wrong. Inshallah, you're wrong. But that mindset, you can see that in Canadian media. Yesterday, there was a published story in one of our leading newspapers saying that the fact that the police are present in these Palest pro-Hamas, what I call them pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian terror protests is wrong because it makes it seem as if these protests, are dangerous.
Yes, yes. Uh,
I couldn't laugh. I couldn't stop laughing because bashing Windows businesses isn't dangerous. Stopping people from moving on the streets isn't dangerous. Violence isn't dangerous. Please let us know what is dangerous.
but
You
by the
know?
way, just for you to know, this kind of rationale, it literally is part of the distorted
Right.
mindset of the Middle East. So, for example, I have had Muslims look at me and say that when the kuffar, the infidels, are killed, it's done very mercifully because it's a quick sort of, cut of the neck. You really feel no pain. So in a sense, the person who's had their head detached from the rest of their body hopefully still has enough force when the body is detached to say thank you because it was done in a truly merciful way. Now, they don't say that with any sense of, dark sarcasm. It's literally meant. So this is why, by the way, Igal, I say that the West doesn't have what I call cultural theory of mind. Theory of mind is a very important social ability, which is I need to put myself in your mind to be able to have a meaningful conversation. And actually, autistic children, you diagnose them as being autistic because they fail a theory of mind test. So I take this principle, which typically operates at the individual level, and I argue that at the cultural level, the West doesn't have cultural theory of mind when it comes to the Middle East because the West thinks that the values that they have enshrined as noble, compassion, kindness, generosity, beneficence, magnanimity, those will be reciprocated, whereas they're heard by the other group as weakness, 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 weakness. Hence, I've explained when I speak to those people, they tell me the West is a woman to be mounted. Okay. But again, Joe Smith and Chantal Leblanc doesn't speak that language. And therefore, I'm always speaking beyond them because they say, oh, you're such an extremist yourself. I mean, my convenience store clerk, Ahmad, is the loveliest guy. He's the sweetest, most peaceful guy. So you take an individual exemplar of a lovely Muslim individual and you say they are the representation of true Islam. So stop spreading your Islamophobia, Professor. So, I want to always be optimistic, but I feel like it's an impenetrable problem that is here with us forevermore. We're almost out of time. Can you leave us with any optimism and then tell us where we can get or watch your movie, The Killing Roads?
Right. I think we should all have discussions about this and um the optimism part is hard. I'm not gonna lie. I'll leave the optimism to you. Your beautiful smile is optimistic, so
Oh,
there we go. In terms of The Killing Road, you can watch it for free. We made it available completely for free from day one on thekillingroads.com. You can also follow it on TKR, the movie, on X. The film is available on X and also on YouTube. We had to take our older version was taken down. We brought up a new one. So it's on X at The Killing Roads as well. But and if you go to thekillingroads.com, you can everything is available there and you can watch it wherever you want. And it's available fully for free. And any institution, any organization, anyone who wants to show it publicly, I'm more than happy. You have carte blanche, show it. The whole point is to get the movie out there. That's why I made it, because I want people to understand what really happened on October 7th. And this is one part, right? That's just the roads. We're not talking about the kibbutzim. We're not talking about the Nova Party. We're not talking about cities like Sderot and Ofakim. This is just one part of the savage barbarity that Palestinian terrorist unleashed on Israel on October 7th.
Well, thank you for having the stomach to actually be able to document all this craziness. It does take courage to do it. So thank you for your work. Last question as we wrap it
Sure.
up. Are there any projects down the pipeline that you're currently working on that you'd like to use this opportunity to tell us about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm doing a another October 7th film that's very positive. It is about the aftermath. I'm the producer and the editor. The director is Israeli director Dotan Naveh. It's filmed by Lior Cohen and Gabriel Volkovic. And the film looks at a group of women post October 7th. We started filming 2 weeks after the 7th and how they survived, remarkable stories. And then how do they move on, which is a reflection of the state of Israel and maybe the Jewish diaspora. How do we move on? How can we move on? What do we need to move on? And it's a very beautiful movie about strength and women's resilience. The Tan did a great job, as did Lior and Gabriel. I'm producing and I'm editing it here in Canada. And I'm doing another film about the seventh, and it'll be my last film about the seventh
The
because there's
trilogy.
the trilogy, and I there's so much one can handle in terms of sadness. But it is a film that is going to be even sadder than The Killing Roads, but it won't be graphic. It's a film that from the first frame breaks your heart, but it's an important film, and hopefully we can get funding for it, and hopefully we can begin filming it in October in Israel for about a month or 2 months.
Well, Shabbat Shalom to you and your loved ones. Thank you for your work and thank you for coming on the show to discuss these important, although extremely somber topics. Thanks so much, Igal.
Thank you so much, and such a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you. Cheers. Likewise.